Welcome to Motion Makers, a gentle revolution in community culture. I'm Amber Redman, and you are about to watch an episode that my friend Nolan Reynolds and I recorded on the topic of personal value systems. And since we recorded this episode, I have come to find how very important the episode is. As you can probably tell, I'm in a weird location right now, a place that doesn't look like home necessarily, and that would be true, and I'm showing you this on purpose because I have a story that I want to tell you in the intro, and I'll try to make it short because the short version of this story is that a year ago my family's life changed because of a vocational change. And when our life changed, one thing that happened was we had to define and begin to live by our family value system. Now, I've been married to my husband for over 10 years now, and we've been together longer than that. And so we had a value system, but it was a value system that we hadn't necessarily named yet. Well, the next thing that happened after we named what it was that we needed to stay true to in our family with this change was then I was alone a lot because he was away at work. Kind of accidentally, I began to name my own personal values. And you'll hear in this episode, I'll tell Nolan that I haven't named them, but I've found since recording this episode that I did name them. I just hadn't really reflected on it enough. So then, a year into our new work life, family dynamic, etc., we were realizing things were just not working well in my family, to be completely honest. Like, things weren't working well in our family. Things were going really well with work, but what was it that we were prioritizing? Were we prioritizing the way that our life was shaped, or were we prioritizing what our family's actual values were? And that is why I'm here and not at home, because we learned as a family only through naming our personal and family values and getting really intentional just by asking the questions that we needed to ask, that we needed to change everything. And the reality is we had to start from the ground and work our way into something new. Now, this morning I was reading Present Over Perfect by Shauna Nyquist, and she quotes one of her friends who said to her, "Stop. Remake everything from the inside out." And when I read that, I was like, that is exactly what we just did. We remade in the first year our vocation from the inside out. And in the second year, we remade our family from the inside out. And we did it by starting with naming our personal values. So this is a really deeply important topic to me, and I really hope that in this episode, when you hear Nolan and I talk about it, you can hear that we're passionate, and also the invitation and the challenge to name your own personal value system.
All right. Hello, Motion Makers, and welcome back to the Motion Makers podcast. I am Nolan.
And I'm Amber. Hi.
I am indeed Amber.
I am indeed Amber. I forgot.
This is Amber. This is one of the many things that we do at Cultivating Kentucky. All right, last episode, we talked about hope.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. We talked about hope. Today, we are going to talk about personal values. But before we get into that, I've got one question that I want to start with.
Okay.
All right. At the beginning of the last episode, you talked about Shelby and how she's a person that inspires hope in you, right? So now we're going to flip that a little bit, and we're going to try to look from Shelby's perspective. All right.
Okay.
What is one, two, maybe three things? I don't know. However many things you want to say. What are some things that you think Shelby would say are unique about you?
Oh, man.
I don't tell her this question before we start. It's a surprising question.
Yes, it's his assignment. Oh, and he's really good at it.
It is the only task I've been given.
Except to show up.
I don't answer text message, emails, so much so that she printed off all the stuff that she tried to email me that I never looked at. to hand to me in person.
That's right. Yes, it's true.
So the least I can do is come up with a good question. Since you're literally doing everything else.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you. I don't show up and look like an idiot because you do everything else.
Maybe that's one thing that Shelby would say about me is that I am an organized leader.
You make all of us idiots look better.
Oh my gosh.
All right, so Shelby would say?
I think Shelby would say that I pursued her in friendship, which I kind of talked about a little bit. But she's told me a few times that was important to her because I think it's true that in our culture right now, people don't show people that they care enough.
Yeah.
Like, how often do you go up to somebody and say, like, hey, I really appreciate that you're my friend? Or, hey, I just met you, but can we be friends?
Yeah.
Like, it's first grade
Playground style.
playground. Yeah, exactly. But why did that work on the playground?
Because it was honest.
Correct.
And open.
Yes. Oh, I think Shelby would say those things about me too.
Yeah, that you're honest and open.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say any of those things about you.
Oh, good.
Full of deception.
Yes.
Completely closed-minded. Mm-hmm. Not willing to listen.
Yeah. That tracks. All of that tracks. Catch me on a bad day, okay?
Catch me outside. How about that? All right, so she would say that you pursued her, which is cool. That tracks with something that I've learned about you, that you're a nurturer, maybe first and foremost, that you really care about people. So I think that really makes sense. I have absolutely found you to be open, intelligent, all of those things, honest.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
All of that makes sense.
When you say nurturer, that matters a lot to me because I have a marker that I check nearly daily of how I'm nurturing, not just outside of myself, but inside of myself too, because I think that comes first. Because if you're not taking good care of yourself, then any nurturing that you're doing externally is probably not coming from a healthy place, or can often not be coming from a healthy place. So sorry. I have timers to check in with myself. Speaking of nurturing.
Nurture yourself.
Yeah,
Aww.
weird.
You're like mama bird and baby bird.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you just chew up your own food.
That's right. Weird.
Oh, man.
I'm going to flip the question on you. Are you ready?
Boy. I almost didn't ask this question because this time I remembered that you were going to flip the question on me.
Okay, so...
And I honestly think there's nothing good about me.
Oh, come on. That's not true. I'm going to call Waylon and he can tell us himself.
Man.
What would Waylon, Dave, and Nathan say?
Nathan would call me an idiot first and foremost.
Oh, good. It's that kind of a friendship.
Absolutely.
Huh? Good. We need those, honestly.
He would say that there is nothing good about him. That would be probably his first answer. But in the most loving way possible. Like the kind of way that like a bro says to a bro that actually means, he's like, hey, you're ridiculous. I can't stand you. Which actually means, man, I love you so much.
Yeah, because guys are allergic to, hey, man, I care about you. See, you even had to turn away from me when I said that. Yeah, you were like, oh, we're going to have an allergic reaction here.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think Waylon has probably called me smart a couple of times. Dave, that one is probably a little easier. I think he would recognize a shared ambition that he and I have to accomplish things that not are necessarily great by any like monetary standard, but are just that are meaningful. We have ambition to do things that are meaningful, of which Waylon and Nathan both share too. But think about what they would say about me.
Let me ask the question differently. It might be easier to answer for you. Why would they say that you're the friend that they keep around? Like, what is it that Waylon is like, you know, Nolan, that's who I go to for that?
That's an easier answer.
I thought maybe. That's
a better question than I asked. Thank you. I think pretty surely they would say, specifically Waylon would say, because I'm willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do. I'm willing to go the extra mile. I'm willing to go the extra 1,000 miles when other people aren't willing to do so in pretty well every avenue of my life. And I think that's probably something that I know that he recognizes in me, that is a shared trait of his and I, because Waylon is the exact same way.
Yeah. Ooh, I also find that to be true because, like, here's the thing. When you were invited to do Cultivating Kentucky with us, it was kind of like, the way that Josie invites people is she kind of tells people that we're going to do a thing and, like, here's where to show up. And then, like, a handful of those people will show up because, a handful of people do have follow through. But here's the thing is that your care for what we're doing has meant that you've shown up every single time, to the point where I know that we can rely on you.
Right.
And I think that that's a really good quality to have.
You can rely on me to show up when I'm needed, but not to answer a text message.
That's okay, because I'm going to track you down with a blue folder full of papers.
like, hey, I printed all this stuff out for you. When you handed that to me yesterday, I was like, I wouldn't answer the emails. That was so funny.
I didn't even try to send it an email. I knew better.
I like how the other day Josie sent me a text, because Josie texting me is out of the norm. And so I checked that one immediately because I was like, this isn't normal. Like, she wouldn't typically send me a text message.
Yeah.
And it was to tell me about an email that you had sent me that I needed to check. And I was like, that was so smart. Like, they played me, bro.
Noted.
They knew me.
We didn't even do it on purpose. Joey was playing games on my phone.
No kidding. Well, it worked.
Yeah, it did.
And it was a good thing because I needed to check
thing.
that email.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well noted. I'm going to have Josie track you down from now on.
Well, if it becomes normal, I won't answer it anymore.
Oh, that's true. Dang it.
Because I'll see it pop up if it's somebody that I talk to regularly and have a good relationship with. I know this is irresponsible, and I know it's not good. So don't come for me in the comments, all right? But if it's somebody that I'm close to and I have a good relationship with, I'll be like, I'll check that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Because currently my attention is focused on something else. And I try, for better or for worse, all right? I try to not take my attention off of what's happening in front of me in, like, the real world, to put it on my cell phone. I try to be abnormal in that way. But then it leads me to just being a bad friend.
Okay, you say that every time, but it's not true. You are not a bad friend.
There's a little bit.
I just have to figure out another way to get around that, which is infinitely harder because I don't live here. Yes.
You're like, I can't just come have dinner with you and your wife. I'm in Michigan.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I know how to find you on a Sunday, though. So
That's right.
I will have a blue folder.
I try to be infinitely present wherever my presence actually is.
Which,
And
honestly,
that's how I'm going to choose to frame it from now on.
I think you should, because I appreciate that. And I'm sure that the people that you are present with also appreciate that. That's why you're able to have the friendships you're able to have, where you know, like, I know that you're not going to answer my call or look at my text. But I also know that when I come here, I'm going to have your full presence.
That's right. Absolutely.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sure your other friends do too.
They do. That was something that I think Eli deserves a mention in these friendships that I've been talking about as well. Especially over the last several months, he and I have really bonded. But that's something that he has specifically pointed out, because he and I and a couple other guys meet every Saturday morning at 7 a.m. And one of the things that he told me just a few weeks ago was he said that I cannot remember a time whenever you and I were having a face-to-face conversation where you checked a text message or that wasn't really important. Like a while ago when we were starting the podcast, Kelsey, my wife, sent me a text message and I was like, I got to check this real quick.
Right.
But outside of something that could be really important, I try to stay connected where I am. So that's my frame from now on.
I appreciate that.
I am infinitely present in the moment.
Yes. I think that's a good thing. I think it's really good. Okay.
Let's stop talking about me.
Okay. Are you uncomfortable yet?
So uncomfortable. If you could see what's happening with my legs right now. They're just
Oh,
shaking
no kidding.
uncontrollably.
If you guys don't know this, I had to move the camera onto a different table because he gets so uncomfortable when we talk about him. It couldn't be here.
Yeah, the first episode, I think, said, "Can you stop shaking your legs?"
And then he's just shaking the table with his hands to drive me crazy.
That doesn't sound like me.
Not at all. Not even a little bit.
Oh, man. So, first, tell us, we talked about hope last time.
Yeah, we did. Yes.
And this time we're talking about personal values.
Yes, we
right?
are.
Can you help us flesh out the bridge there?
Okay. Yes, I can. So in the last episode, we talked about having a hopeful vision of an alternative future or better future, and that we have a responsibility to seeking that hope. And I think also we have a responsibility to naming what we want that alternative future to look like.
Right.
One active way that we've done that is like naming what we want Cultivating Kentucky to become in like a community center and a place that's welcoming and creating safe spaces. Now, naming the vision only goes so far, right? If you're going to go past having the vision or being the visioneer, is that the right word?
Sure.
Okay. Then
Okay.
second guessing myself. Then you have to get intentional. How am I going to develop this vision of an alternative future that I have named? Mm-hmm. So, not using Cultivating Kentucky as an example, I homeschool my son. He's 11 years old. I homeschool both of my sons, but one's 3, so it's very vastly different.
Yeah.
But my 11-year-old, I've homeschooled on and off since he was like 4.
Right.
And so I have a hope for what I hope that that's doing for him. Mm-hmm. But if I just name that hope and I don't take it any further, then I'm not developing what he needs. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, the bridge is that in order to develop that named hope, you have to then get intentional about what that looks like. And I think that the next step is a value system.
Absolutely.
So you have spent time sitting down.
I have.
And naming a value system.
I have, yes.
What does that look like?
Yes.
Yes.
You asked
you told me you were going to do this too.
You asked it in a different way, and it didn't
did.
even click with me. I just kept saying yes. So I was just looking back through my notes. This has been, and maybe this deserves some updating even, but I do have a personal value system, and I have a value system for my family. And so my personal value system is broke down into like 3 sections. Like the first one is intellectual, mm-hmm. And don't get that confused with me thinking that I'm an intellectual, but it's things that I want to do to like feed my brain.
Yes.
And then I have a physical, which is things that I want to do to like feed my body well, and then an intangible, which is just traits that I hold dear and that I think are worthy of pursuing.
Okay, I want to pause there because I think I've had a conversation with a lot of people that I care about their personal value systems. Mm-hmm. That seems to be a through line in a lot of my friends' lives, is that they've named that. You are the first person ever, which I think is very intelligent. It's very wise.
Oh, I was going to think that it's probably silly then.
No, that it's tiered like that. That you've kind of said, like, this is the way that's going to flesh out through intellect, through physical, through intangible. And I would like to pause there because I think that it's really important, because if I go up to somebody that hasn't named a personal value system and I'm like, what are your personal values and how are you going to name them? They're going to be like,
huh?
I don't know.
What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Actually, when I was talking to Jake about this, he was like, you sound like a lawyer. I was like, I don't know if that's good or bad.
I think that's good.
Probably. But my goal in this episode is to bring that down to ground a little bit. And I think that the way that you've tiered your values, like before we get into them, is really wise, because I think that it brings it down to ground.
Yeah.
And also, like before we get into what the values are,
right,
which I think that I want to do, what does the process look like in naming them, or like finding what your value system is?
Yeah, so for me, that looked like sitting down. So I've kind of prided myself on being somebody that lived by a specific set of principles, and I have often fallen short of those principles. And there are other principles. Whenever you fall short of those principles, you like a great Christian value is repentance, right? We talked about how we're both Christians. It means you turn from your ways and go a different direction. So I was going the long way around and lost track of where I was.
You were saying a principle that you fall short on.
And then yes, I've prided myself on living a principled life and trying to be a good man, and I've, like I said, often fallen short in that. But I do my best, and so with that being the case, with that living by a set of principles that were important to me, what I did was I just sat down and I started writing out things that were already valuable to me, that I already tried to pursue, even if it was in a vague way, because until you name them, and it's really difficult to be intentional towards something that you have not yet named.
Agreed.
But these were things that I found in my daily life and disciplines that were important to me, that I wanted to focus on, and that at different times I would focus on. And so for me, it came by naming the things that I already held dear.
Yeah. Okay, I said earlier that I wanted to tell you a story, and it's because I think that this story is a really great illustration of that.
Perfect.
Because I think that it's really important that we let our values reveal themselves to us, and that we don't say, okay, this is a moralistic viewpoint that I want to live up to, because that's not always... Oh, good, okay. Thought you were going to disagree with me for a second, and I was worried. Okay, good. Because, so I'm just going to tell the story. So I've mentioned that I own a business. Specifically, we are builders. My employees, I love this phrase that I adopted from somewhere else. They build federal infrastructure with their bare hands. But just kidding, OSHA, because we do use gloves. Anyway.
Don't come for me, OSHA.
Don't come for me, OSHA. Anyway, no, we work on federal buildings and we're builders. And so I have a lot of men that work for us, because in the trades, usually men. And we also travel for our work. So in this instance, I was with one of our tradesmen, and we were driving to Pennsylvania where we work. And thankfully, I am also good friends with most of the people that work with us. So he was starting to share something new to me. Like, I've known this part of his story, but he's never shared like this aspect of his life. And as he was sharing it, he was telling me how much he learned that impact mattered to him. And he was saying, like, my actions in this instance, I wish I had known better that my actions had impact on other people.
Right.
And he repeated that so many times that I looked at him and I was like, Jay, I think impact is one of your personal values, because you've said that like 7 different times, and I think that's vastly important. Like, how important is impact to you? And he said it's extremely important. And I was like, that's a really good foundation to beginning to name your personal value system.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I think the first step in the process is like listening to yourself.
Yeah.
Which can be done in conversation. It can be done through journaling, which I don't know if you guys can tell, but we have like several journals right here, right now.
We both write a lot.
We write a lot. But for people that don't typically journal, there are other ways to start hearing like how your values come up, I guess. Like, what is it that you continually teach your kids? What is it that you repeat to your kids all the time? If you don't have kids, then what is it that like has deeply mattered to you? All of those things can reveal what your values are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's powerful stuff. And that is kind of, what you're talking about is kind of what the process was for me in naming my values, was just finding the things that are important to me. And I think as I look at this list, I remember creating, this was back in May 17th of 2022 whenever I created this list. And I think it's probably worth updating now, because I think throughout this process of holding it the best I can to these values, I've found other things to also be really important.
Ooh, that's really good insight. Because I also think that naming your personal value system doesn't mean that you now create a monument to this value system because of the seasons of life that we're in. Like, there are certain things, like, I think Jay would maybe create a monument to impact because it's so impactful for him. But also, there are things that develop. And I think that's important to hold space for.
And there are other things that didn't develop, but that were just there that I discovered throughout the last couple of years. One of them was one that you mentioned when we were having a FaceTime, whatever, call.
Yeah.
Talking about the podcast and like fleshing out the ideas and stuff like that. And you talked about curiosity for you. And curiosity is huge for me. Like, if you were to go have a conversation with Kelsey right now and ask her what it's like to share a car ride with me, she would say that I come up with the most off-the-wall questions.
Yeah.
Just...
I can only imagine.
I've always been a wildly curious person. I have the most off-the-wall questions and thoughts all the time. And so I think that would probably be worth updating as well. And I think that's probably a good lesson. Like, if you want to create a personal value system, recognize, like Amber said, that they're not set in stone, or they're not. Right. You don't have to build a monument to one system or one list of things. Like, they can evolve as you evolve, and they can evolve as you learn about you.
And also, like, as your seasons evolve. Like, I think that I'm going to probably talk about seasons a lot, because I think that we can get stuck in a season and we're like, this is how it's forever going to be. And I think that the value of a personal value system being seasonal is kind of like, okay, my kids are little and we're in this little kid stage, and my value system now is presence with them, right? But, and not that presence is necessarily going to change, that might be a bad example, but when my kids are 16 and they have their license and they don't necessarily want to be present with me, then, like, a new value system may reveal itself.
Right. Yeah.
To, like, now my value is allowing them independence because I trust them.
Yeah. Oof.
And
we could talk for a year on the significance of that in parenting, but this is not a parenting podcast.
Correct.
Which is tough.
That is tough.
Because I hear something that I like.
And you want to talk about it. Heard. No, I think that that's valuable, but also I'm glad that we talked in the last episode about naming our season and the hope in that season and being present to that. Because if you are setting your personal value system right now, I want you to know that everything can be flexible. Like, when we started the conversation, the FaceTime we had where we were talking about this episode, and you told me about your value system, I went through and I started the process of renaming mine. Even though I do live by a value system, I recognize that in this season that I'm in right now, as things have changed hugely in the last year, like, I needed to revisit what is true for me right now. Right. And what do I need right now? Which I think is a good question to start with when you're naming your values.
Right.
Like, what is it that I need? Okay, so a good example of that, I think, is some of your values, because you said that they are intellectual, physical, intangible. Yeah, so when you went through and you named, like, the intellectual and the physical, were you looking at what you needed?
Yeah, I guess to some degree I was looking at what I needed to function at the best level that I could possibly function at. And the things that I already strived for, but not as intentionally. So I think it was pairing those two things together, because, should I name them?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the intellectual side. Again, don't hear me say I think that I'm an intellectual. This is just what I think my brain needs.
You value intellect.
Yeah, right, I do.
Yeah.
Let's go. Reading, writing, and evaluating. I try to every day read something and write something. And often, it used to be monthly, which nobody really knew that I did. It was just something that I did for me, which is actually where this list came from. It came from a sermon about teaching the people at my church to evaluate themselves in their walk with Christ. And this system came from that. So I would evaluate myself even before I had anything to evaluate myself against, which is
this value
what
system
this is. So it used to be monthly, but I haven't been doing it as often, which is like a letdown of one of the principles that I hold to.
Okay, so, oh man, I have a great question. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when you let yourself down when you're not living to your value system?
I have a rubber band on my hand, and every time I notice that, I pop myself. That's why I have this scratch right
Do
here.
you really?
No,
I
none
was
of that was true.
When you started showing me the scratch, I was like, nah.
Wow, this is real. I'm also a masochist,
Yeah,
which you will find out
apparently.
because one of my values is suffering. People are like, what?
Yeah,
Suffering?
they're gonna think you're really weird.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't have a discipline that I put myself through if I don't do it well.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
I think because it shouldn't be a discipline.
Okay.
I was setting you up, kind of. I didn't realize until you said discipline.
Wow, what a jerk.
Ah, rude. I think okay, for myself personally, I'm not going to speak for you.
Okay.
You can tell me if you find this to be true. When I catch myself not living to my values, usually what I need is self-compassion. And self-compassion by way of probably evaluation. In my value system, I use reflection as the word that's
good.
similar to evaluation. But so reflection is one of definitely my core values. And I have systems for that. Like I already said, I journal a lot. I also have a lot of planners, to the bane of my husband's existence. But I use them to not plan ahead of time. I actually reverse plan, and that's my reflection system.
Yeah.
Okay, so in my reflection system, I have to ask myself, what is the barrier that has been keeping me from living this value system? Because I've already named this value system is deeply important to me.
Right.
So what is the barrier that's keeping me from that? And usually, not all of the time, but usually what I find is what I need to cross that barrier is self-compassion. And reflection is a good example because often I have a weekly journal that I illustrate when I reverse plan. I illustrate in it, and that's just for me. And so it's also the thing that will get forgotten first. But if I'm not doing it, I'm usually not well. Like Shelby knows me super well, and she'll be like, "You're spiraling. Have you done your planner? Or have you cleaned off your dining room table?" So those are the two things that usually help. And so when I catch myself and I say, what is my barrier? Usually my barrier is that I haven't created the time, or I haven't whatever. It doesn't really matter, because what matters is like, now I recognize I didn't create the time to do the planner this week. I didn't protect that time from myself, essentially. Before I can create that time and protect that time, I have to have compassion for myself, because if I'm beating myself up about it, then going back to it is no longer a function of freedom. It's more of a function of beating myself up. There's a huge difference between conviction and condemnation.
Absolutely.
And so I think self-compassion is probably a value of mine I haven't named yet.
Yeah.
But I think self-compassion is where we start with, am I condemning myself or am I convicted about this?
So I think for me, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. That's not how I operate best, I don't think. I think there are certainly times where that is true for me too. I think for me it's almost the opposite. Like if I'm not doing the things that I know are valuable and important to me, I don't need to have compassion for me. I need to quit being lazy and just do it. That is barring some type of tragedy or some type of like personal hardship that I'm going through. Like when those things come, I'm like, I'm going to give myself compassion. I'm like, all right, like you didn't live up to what you're supposed to be doing. That's okay for today.
Right.
Or that's okay for this week because such and such happened.
Right.
But you need to get back on it next week. Right now, I have not been evaluating, not for any reason in particular other than I just haven't done it. I got complacent where that thing specifically is concerned. And I think self-compassion would not work for me in
And
that
I
way.
think that this
I think
is-
I need a swift kick in the pants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But I love this so much because this is part of why it's a personal value system.
Absolutely.
Because you are a vastly different person than I am.
Yep.
listener is probably vastly different than any of us. And I think that it's super important to recognize that what you name for yourself is individual
Right.
to anything else.
The question is, what's going to get you back on track?
Correct.
If that's self-compassion for you, then great.
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself compassion and get back on track. For me, it just doesn't look like that.
Right.
I can compassion myself right into complacency.
Yeah. Not me, not usually. But also, do you have people that keep you accountable to your value system?
No. I have one. Yeah, Dave.
Yeah?
Yep, he's probably outside of the... I didn't even share these that Sunday. I shared one row of these. So this will be the first time I've shared the whole list with anybody outside of my wife and Dave. No, but I don't think anybody else has ever heard the whole list.
Really?
Yeah. And maybe you, I may have told you.
You told me
on the
at
phone.
our meeting, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So outside of this room,
Okay.
the only person I've ever told the whole list to, but he is really good about checking in regularly and asking me where I am, like what I'm doing. And there was one time not that long ago, he sent me a message which I will love him forever for. He told me that I was letting myself down and I was letting my family down and that I needed to do better. And I was like, because it's not an easy message to send to a friend. And he was right. And we got back on track.
That's cool.
Not perfectly, but we got back on track.
I think that also speaks to differences because I could never receive that message very well personally. But I think that what we're saying about accountability is really important because I guess if we're talking about the steps in the process, it starts with like reflection, hearing yourself, essentially, knowing what it is that you need your value system to be, naming that, which we've already said is vastly important, and then staying accountable to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And he really does help me with that.
Yeah.
Especially since like he wasn't mad at me. Like he wasn't angry with me.
But he knew how to talk to you in a way that meant a lot to you.
He really cared about me, and he told me the hard thing when the hard thing needed to be said.
Right.
Which I've mentioned in another podcast. I don't know if that was today.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter. Anyways, so that the intellectual is the read, write, evaluate. The physical is exercise, meditate, and play. And something that I want to bring up is all of these things can be accomplished through many different ways. And that's why I think it's really important to have a set of values, but then to flesh out what those values mean. Because meditate to me is a encompassing thing where it's not like I'm not sitting with my legs crossed going hum like that,
Yeah.
But in my prayer time and reading time in the mornings, like if I run across a Bible verse that really means something to me, like I want to sit in the quiet and deal with that, and I want to think about it. And like the meditating, it also like meditating on God's word and also praying I use as like a catch-all for that. And then playing for me is hugely important because I have a tendency to like just go all in one direction, and everybody who knows me knows that like I'm kind of goofy and silly, but if I'm not careful, I will find myself in a place and in a zone where it's only serious all the time, and there's the outside world doesn't even exist. Like I'm just nose to the ground, go.
Yeah.
And so it's really important for me to make that a discipline because we have to have balance in our lives.
Yeah.
The intangibles for me are discipline. Some people are going to love this one. Some people are going to hate it. Discipline, suffering, and resilience. Suffering is one of the big ones for me, and that's one that some people are going to love and some people are going to hate. But it's important for me.
Yeah. From our conversation before, I think that those three things kind of revolve in a circle for you,
Absolutely.
don't
they absolutely do.
Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so suffering, I don't mean like I'm not actually a masochist.
Yeah.
Like I'm not actually like trying to crucify myself or actually popping myself with a rubber band all the time or anything. But I mean suffering meaning doing hard things. I heard somebody say one time that everybody is going to suffer. The question is whether or not you'll learn to suffer well. And the only way to learn to suffer well is to self-impose suffering on yourself. And so I do things that I say that I call suffering. People be like, suffering, like you're getting in a bathtub with cold water. And so I wanted to preface all of that with, I understand that like I'm not in a third world country starving to death. I'm not suffering to that extent, but I put myself through really difficult things to force my mind and my body to have to overcome it.
Right.
Because one of these days, and it has happened in the past and it will happen again, that I'm going to go through something that feels overwhelming to me. But if I have put my mind and my body in enough situations to feel overwhelmed, I'll be able to deal with the pressure when it comes.
Yeah, you're talking about building your window of tolerance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just talked about that the other day off camera,
Yes.
building that window of tolerance. So yeah, but you have to be very disciplined to put yourself through those really hard things, and resilience is the follow-up from that. You either give up or you don't.
Right.
And if you don't, you build resilience, and if you do, you grow weakness.
Right.
And so, yeah, they all
revolve.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really important, and I would like to revisit window of tolerance like in a later episode and kind of like that whole system maybe, because I think that there's a value in understanding our limits.
Right.
And I think that that's part of what you're talking about is like, I know my limit is I can only probably sit in an ice bath for however long, but I'm going to push past that enough to build resilience.
Yep.
That does not mean that you are freezing yourself to the point of hypothermia in an ice bath, but...
Almost.
Yeah.
No, just playing.
From Michigan, we're really serious about hypothermia, okay?
Yeah, that's a big deal for y'all.
It really is a big deal for us, yes.
Yeah.
I am just still naming my personal values, so I don't know that I have any to like really share.
Right.
But I think that the value in this conversation is really in what is the process of naming them, and why, like, okay, if we're going to leave them with one takeaway, what's the most important thing that you think a listener should take from this?
I think, truthfully, human beings are cursed with complacency. And I think it is one of the most detrimental things that any of us can encounter in our lives to inhibit our personal growth. We are cursed to get stuck in a process of monotony and complacency. And if you want to break out of that cycle, to have a hope, like a hope for an alternative future, like if you want that, if you want more than what you currently have or different than what you currently have, you have to break that curse. And the only way to break that curse is to be very intentional. Now, we could sit back and say, like, okay, I'm going to be very intentional about not being complacent. Okay, well, what does that look like?
Exactly.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, right.
Okay, you don't know. That means that you need a personal value system so that you have specific things that you can strive for every day, like reading, writing, and evaluating, exercising, meditating, and playing. Those are disciplines that I can put into practice regularly, all the time. These intangibles are things that come from doing those things and from pursuing them in other avenues. And if I'm very intentional about doing these specific things, I'm going to grow in much more significant ways so that I don't become complacent. We are, what is it called? One of the greatest things that God did for us, but one of the things that human beings have not learned real well to deal with is this thing that psychologists discovered or observed. I don't remember what year it was, but it was a while back, but not that long ago, maybe 30, 40 years, called the default mode network, I believe is what it's called. And it's essentially your brain's autopilot system, because we can't intentionally take every single breath. There's no way. Like, you'd be exhausted by the time the day was over.
Yeah.
You can't intentionally put your one foot in front of the other every single time. Like, you'd be exhausted by the time the day was over, having to intentionally do that. And so our brains have this system in it that the psychologists have observed called the default mode network, where you have a tendency to go into autopilot mode. The problem with that is that it has a tendency to creep itself into other places where we would not want it, like our relationships, like our work, like the way we deal with our significant other or with our kids. Like we get into a habit and we just perpetuate that process over and over and over. And the only way to break out of that curse, because in one way it's a blessing and in another way it's a curse, the only way to break out of that curse is to be very intentional about your life and the things that are important to you. That would be my takeaway.
I think that's a really good takeaway, and I would just add to that the reason why we're talking about complacency and not being stuck there in a podcast about building community is because a community is made up of individual people. And so if the majority of the community is stuck in that revolving cycle of putting one foot in front of the other, then that's going to show itself outside of us.
Absolutely.
And so that's why we will talk probably a lot on this podcast about things like creating your own personal value system, because we recognize that the only way that we are able to come into our community in a healthy way and serve well is because we're taking care of this from the start, which is with ourselves, and then with our families.
Right.
And then with our community.
Absolutely. I think, Amber, that was maybe my favorite one that we've done so far.
Me too.
Okay, that's good, because I was starting to wonder if it was because I talked so much. So I'm glad that you felt the same way.
No,
That's
I feel like what's happening is that we're developing the conversation the way we wanted to now, because we had to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
And there's value in that. But now we're getting where we want to go.
Yep, I enjoyed it. I hope you all enjoyed it. This is the Motion Makers Podcast, and I hope all you wonderful, beautiful motion makers have a great day.